I think the film is magnificent, but some people, you know, we seem to be in this culture where it's like everything that's like from the 1980s or 1970s is dismissed as cheesy or camp or whatever, and you know, you'll read stuff online like the cheesiest movies, and you know, you'll see Purple Rain there, and I thought, you know, that's really not fair. If you go back and watch it, I mean, you certainly it's a, you know, the costumes are kind of flamboyant and stuff like that, but the filmic basis for the film is incredibly strong. I mean, it's just a beautifully rendered film, I think. So I thought, you know, let's go back and take a look at it and you know, see what's there.
Well, I know that's a common complaint about it, and there are other movies in this camp too that a lot of people will say the only kind of worthwhile thing about the film is the soundtrack, or the only thing that lasts. But so tell me about what it is that you think works about the film itself.
Well, I think Purple Rain was a pioneer in its time, and in that it took the idea of the rock biography, or even the backstage musical to some extent, like 42nd Street, and brought it into the 80s and modernized it. You know, in terms of style, Purple Rain was not influenced by MTV, but it did influence MTV. You know, the idea of, well, look, I can pull points out of this movie, and it's basically a music video. You know, it was able to use a new kind of editing very much of the times that, you know, where you sort of had self-contained pieces of the film, and you know, this was going on at that time, not just on MTV, but in films like Flashdance. You know, it was one of those pioneers from that time saying, hey, you know, this is another way we can do the musical. But more to the point, for me, I suppose, is that I consider like the greatest thing a film can do, you know, the highest plateau of art it can aspire to is this idea that form and content are interwoven, that the form reflects the content or mirrors it in some way or augments it in some way, and I think you really have that in Purple Rain, particularly how the songs reflect character. They reflect where you are in the story, and the visuals, you know, really reflect what's happening in the music. So, you know, there's this real connection there. It's not just like, here, we're randomly having a song. It's like the songs are very important thematically to the film, and they tell you things about the characters that then you don't necessarily have to state in the film. You know, I think it's really terrific. You know, from the opening cross-cutting of "Let's Go Crazy," where literally, you know, Prince steps out of the mist of mystery, you know, and invites us to participate in this, you know, to the end where he's singing, you know, "Baby, I'm a Star," where, you know, I mean, literally, you've seen him become a star through the course of the movie. You fall in love with the guy. He's a charismatic performer, you know. So I just think that Purple Rain really thrives and survives because there's a sense of film artistry there. You know, I'm not sure why people deride it as cheesy. I don't find it particularly cheesy.
I never thought it was cheesy. No, I thought it dealt with some kind of hardened themes. I didn't think. It couldn't be cheesy. This kind of the subject matter of the film was kind of went to some dark places. Yes,
you are so right, and that's one of the things I love about it. You know, I talked in my interview with the film's director about sort of this warts and all approach, and he said, well, you know, we never talked about it like that. But I mean, it is sort of. It's not. This isn't, you know, the glossy this isn't the glossy pre-packaging of Prince as a movie star. This is like, boom, you know, a pretty authentic look at what the scene is like that Prince is a part of, and it doesn't candy coat who he is necessarily, or what world he comes from, or his history, or even his temperament. I mean, he can be a little bit of a prickly bastard in the film, you know, and it's not like, you know, today in Hollywood they would never do that. They would never do that. They would never let a musical star, you know, let this be his vehicle for success, is to show all these different colorations and shades of his personality. So that's one of the things I very much like about the film, is that it does go to those darker places, and it's not afraid to go there. But at the same time, it doesn't try to sell you this image of him as broody, angst-ridden superhero or anything either. I mean, he's a guy with some faults, and he's a guy with some strengths, and he's obviously a artistic genius, and you just get all those shades from the film, I think.
Well, and the line between how much is kind of pulled from his own life and experience, right, and how much is fictional in the creation of this character, the kid, that's a little blurred as well, isn't it?
It absolutely is. Prince has said in interviews, well, we were making a fiction. It's a fictional story, and that's how I was acting. But there's enough of the reality of Prince's life in there for you to feel like you're getting a legitimate sense, even if 100% of the details aren't absolutely true. You're still getting a feeling that you're getting a true sense of who he is as a person and as an artist. Things may have been changed for dramatic purposes or whatever, but the overall feeling is that it's authentic and that it's true. And I think that's sort of what carries over in the film, the sense of this is really this guy. And you can contrast that with other vehicles for music stars where they want to come out and be seen as likable and jocular and fun, Hard to Hold with Rick Springfield. He comes out and he's a jokester and a prankster, and but it's generally pretty terrible, And it's like, oh, there's he put nothing authentic of himself, forward in that film. I don't know if that was his decision or anybody else's. He may just have been carried along in it, but the idea was there. It's like, let's do bubblegum. Let's make you a bubblegum star. And Purple Rain is not a bubblegum movie. That's the difference. Right.
And tell me where where Prince was in his career at the time. He'd just come out with 1999.
That's right. He was beginning to have much more success. The inklings of a more devoted and larger fan base, but he hadn't really played in Peoria yet, so to speak, to use a cliche. And the idea was, he was just an extremely clever businessman, still is, that, he was going to sign up with his managing group again, but only if they got him a movie. It was very forward-thinking. This was a guy who, yes, was amazingly talented, but it's like, man, he was not an easy sell as far as a movie star, just traditionally speaking. He's on the shorter side in terms of stature. He was known for androgyny to some extent, if he was known at all. He wasn't from Hollywood. He wasn't a creature of Hollywood. He was a creature of Minneapolis, Minnesota. And, so it's like, wow, he wasn't even really an easy fit for a movie, but they ended up, present him in a way that people really liked him and liked his scene and wanted to know more. And, the film, of course, set off a fad or trend, Prince fashions, Prince music, people wanting to visit the Mecca of Minneapolis, So it really, he had a well-established career before Purple Rain, but Purple Rain, rocketed him to superstardom.
So what was its origins? What was its purpose when it first got started? The film.
Purple Rain?
Yeah.
Well, Prince knew he could be a movie star, and that's what he wanted to be. And so the calculus was then simply, what kind of story can we tell about Prince that seems true to Prince's experience and, who he is as a person and as a musician and a performer and such. And I think that was always the impetus to do it, was to sort of reveal his world and show to people, this is who I am. And then hopefully people would be attracted to that image, and of course they were. It was Purple Rain sort of shattered all pre-existing conceptions about what kind of an audience a film like this would be. I know that the director, Mr. Manley, was told, well, this is going to play essentially to black teenagers in urban environments. And he said, no, I've made a crossover film, and this is going to play everywhere. And of course it did. It was the film that actually knocked Ghostbusters from its number one perch at the box office that year, which is just a stunning idea that that this low budget film about a somewhat androgynous seeming black music performer could have this crossover success. Yeah. And preview audience after preview audience loved the film, whether the preview audience was in, sort of more urbane Southern California, or it was in Texas. I was like, wow, the film, people responded to the film, and I think that's sort of a testament to its authenticity. In fact, it doesn't really talk down to people, and it doesn't try to really candy coat what Prince's reality is, growing up or what have you, his family life, things like that.
Well, I mean, we've been talking about that this movie could have been just kind of like some kind of PR project to get Prince to play in certain areas that he wasn't, like Peoria. But it's anything but that. Who do you kind of credit with that? Magnoli?
Well, I mean, film is a collaborative art form, and even though I often write about the auteur theory and stuff like that, I think you do have to look at director Magnoli. I think you have to look at Prince and what the essence of the Prince persona is, and I think you have to look at the producer Robert Cavallo. I think that the three of them, in their different roles, they all just, I think they're all responsible, for the success of the film. I think that Prince showed that he was capable of really trusting Magnoli, of a director, and going in the direction that director wanted, and really committing to that direction. I mean, if Prince hadn't wanted to slap a character or be slapped, if he had been out to protect his image, and that's it, protect this very narrow image of the music star, then he probably wouldn't have gotten on board with some of the things that happened in the film. But he did commit. He commit to make a more dramatic picture. And I think, I do credit Mr. Magnoli a lot as well, because I think that he had a sense that the only way that Purple Rain would work and connect to people was if it seemed authentic, if it seemed true in some sense to Prince's world, even if we didn't always know the specifics of that world, if we hadn't sort of been aware of it. But he made a world that was true to the people that made the film. He was in that environment and in those clubs, with Prince and such, and I think he deserves a lot of credit for not trying to make that world something it wasn't. For again, I keep saying candy coated, but for not candy coating it, for not making it, for not making it sort of more acceptable, politically, correct, that kind of thing. There's scenes in there where Prince is really not nice. He's not particularly nice to Wendy and Lisa when they have a song they want him to perform in the film, and he's downright contemptuous of them at points, and it just shows different shades of the artist, his brilliance, but also that performance of Darling Nikki is absolutely brutal. It's an onstage put down of Apollonia's character in the film. It's not all sunshine and roses, which again I think is often the temptation when you're taking a movie star and a music star and trying to put them in a movie. Is that you sort of turn them into a white knight. And Prince, though obviously incredibly talented and gifted, he comes across as anything but that. He comes across as a real human being in the film.
Very troubled, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
There are a couple of kind of trivia anecdotes in the movie that I thought were just delicious. One was that originally it was Vanity and in the Apollonia role, and she left because she got an offer to do Mary Magdalene in Last Temptation of Christ. I didn't know that.
No, I didn't either. And, that's one of the reasons I totally love Mr. Magnoli. When he described that scene to me, he said, Vanity came to me and she said, what would you do? And he said, that would be easy. I'd go do the Martin Scorsese movie. I don't have to put up on a pedestal what I'm doing here. Go do that. But just make sure they're really doing it. And that was good advice because, there were some difficulties in the making of that film and she ended up not being in it. So... Yeah. That's tough, but the great thing to consider is what would a Purple Rain movie have looked like with Vanity as opposed to Apollonia, and I think that Vanity would have given it an even harder edge, which on one hand may have been very interesting, but on the other hand, we look at Apollonia, and in some ways she's our entree to the world because she arrives in the taxi cab at the beginning of the film and sort of becomes caught between these two very powerful personalities, which would be, Prince and Morris Day, and we sort of sympathize with her a little bit. if Vanity had been there, being a little more hard-edged, perhaps being a little more manipulative seeming herself, I don't know that we would have found such an easy entree into the world. I don't know. It would be fascinating. I would love to have both versions side by side, see a Vanity version and an Apollonia version. I'm a fan of both.
I think you're right. I think you're right about Apollonia and the quality that she brings to it, as opposed to someone like Vanity.
Yeah. Apollonia has that innocence, that purity. You don't ever believe, even though she's there to become a star and that's what she wants, you don't believe that she's bad. You don't believe that she's sort of manipulating other people to get what she wants. You just believe she's trying to get ahead, so to speak, and trying to find the best way to do that. She doesn't come across as a particularly cunning character, and I think Vanity had more of that aspect to her, just in terms of her persona.
Mm-hmm. Another interesting, while we're talking about the kind of the supporting characters in the piece, the person that really pops, I remember reading the Pauline Kael review, and she was talking about this as being a special aspect of the film. That Morris Day comes across as just a very special comedian, almost.
Yeah.
But how much of that was kind of just factored into the script just by the nature of who Morris Day was?
Well, the evolution of Purple Rain makes that a little difficult to know for sure, because I know I asked Mr. Magley, I said, there's almost an Abbott and Costello routine in here. It's like who's on first. They're almost, Jerome and Morris Day are almost doing a variation of that. Mm-hmm. Was that in your script? So, that's actually one of the things that came out of the William Blinn script that they then changed and went into. So, it's something different. So I think it was factored in by William Blinn, who was the author of the original material, and then by Mr. Magley, who wrote the script they shot, that he's a bit of a character, that he adds this element to the film, and I think he and Jerome, a lot of people quote them as one of the reasons why the film is so successful. And it's not just that every story needs a villain and kind of a delicious villain, but they open up another side of Prince's world. You see these people who are sort of working against him, and that's important. Mm-hmm. to have that, but they're not like black hats either. They're just funny, and the things they say are hysterical. They're just very. I think they're great characters. I think they add so much to Purple Rain. They're just so funny.
Another thing that surprised me, I guess it didn't surprise me, but I was pleased to read, was that they culled through hundreds of unreleased Prince songs to kind of pull the soundtrack for this film. Is that true?
Yes, that's true, and I think it shows in the film because all the music is so good, and all the music fits so much the beats of the film and augments the thematic narrative bits of the film. That you get the feeling, wow, they must have picked through hundreds, and they must have really been able to choose the ones that best worked for their material, and they really do work. I said, like Darling Nikki, it's not actually. It's not Darling Apollonia, it's not that far, but you know exactly what he's saying, and that's when he's performing that song, and she's in the audience. I mean, you know it exactly. So they were able to do a really good and really sort of canny job of matching, the pre-existing catalog of those unreleased songs to what was happening in the film. I think it's pretty amazing. I mean, from the trajectory of the beginning, Let's Go Crazy, the cross-cutting, to where you arrive at the end, Baby, I'm a Star. I mean, this is sort of the journey that makes Prince a star. I mean, and the songs chart him the whole way. I just love that. I think it's great.
So, I mean, the movie was, you said that it tested very well. It beat Ghostbusters for #1 at the box office. What was it that you think people responded to most in the movie?
Well, I think it was that again, Prince, in showing some aspect of himself, he didn't hide certain unattractive things from us, and that it's like, wow, I can relate to this guy, I mean, that's the amazing thing. I mean, you see this sort of short in stature guy who would, sometimes wear high heels and fur coats kind of thing, and you're like, wow, I get it. He came from a broken home. He's had to deal with these things, and look, here he is, his talent just, coming through, despite all these things that happened, maybe even because of it. I think that people were inclined to see, how much Prince had made of himself, and he really did. I think the film really showcased that. I mean, it didn't hurt either that the critics just absolutely, fell over themselves, praising the film, which I think is really merited. I mean, Gene Siskel and Roger Ebert had it on their 10 best of the year list, which is really pretty amazing, to think about. And how many films are made a year, and Purple Rain is up there. I mean, I'd certainly agree. Other critics. I mean, I talked a little bit about in the book. Another critic, compared it to Citizen Kane. Just because it was sort of deconstructing old ideas about the musical and recreating new ideas around that format, around how you present it, around who can be a star, all kinds of stuff. I think it's hard to know why a film hits, but I think the people who saw it probably on that opening weekend really liked it, and they told their friends, something like that. Nothing beats word of mouth. I think the people who saw it probably went back to see it again, and they told other people, this is great. Every now and then there's a movie like that, and all the discussion about hype these days and things like that. There's a lot of manufactured hype around movies today, but I have to think that anything that came out of Purple Rain wouldn't have been based on manufactured hype. It would have been based really on the people who saw the film and how much they appreciate it and how good it was.
Yeah, and there's also always a kind of indefinable element. I mean, for a movie to hit the zeitgeist like that one did, it's just the right time. It was in the air at the time,
That, you're absolutely right. It's like, it's catching lightning in a bottle. I don't know exactly how they did. I don't know if Prince was primed to go that big. I don't know if it was because when Doves Cry hit so big right before the film came out, they released it, I guess, at that time. It was written for the film, but that came out and people loved it. It's like, boom, people were just primed for that movie. I don't think it was manufactured hype. I do think it's just like what you said. It was something in the zeitgeist that people were becoming ready for Prince, for the Purple Rain of Prince.
And he's never been as revealing as he was there. I mean, since that time, we don't get a sense necessarily that we know in him in a comfortable way.
Absolutely. I like to say he's receded into that mist. He's gone, and his films after Purple Rain sort of lacked a sense of humor, and they were sort of more distant thing. His second film, Under the Cherry Moon, was really pretty terrible. It was this black and white kind of screwball musical comedy thing that, instead of showing us Prince, it put up another layer of separation between us and Prince, and I think that's why it didn't do well. I think Prince's magic, comes from, in part, who he is, and it seemed like too much of a stretch or something to put him in that other time and that other kind of format. It's like, wow, this isn't why I like Prince. It was very different.
Yeah. And yet, at the same time, The Sign of the Times is one of the great concert films. But Graffiti Bridge, which was his kind of return to that character, didn't work.
No, it didn't work, and it's another, I would say weak film. And I think if you look at it, it's that because it doesn't seem to have a sense of humor about Prince. It doesn't. It's almost too much about the preciousness of Prince in some way.
Yes.
I think both of those later films suffer from that flaw. Purple Rain was, boom, here it is, the whole picture, the whole enchilada. This is me. This, could have been called This Is Prince, and you see him, with that little puppet making those sounds and stuff. You see him doing funny things, you see him doing rotten things, but you still root for him. He's just a kind of developed person in Purple Rain, which he's not in those other films. They're sort of more taken with protecting who he is rather than revealing who he is,
right,
to some extent. At least I feel that way.
Is there, if they come back to you about doing another music on film book, are there films that you're particularly passionate about that can fit that mold?
Yes, I would love to do another music on film book. I love writing these books. My next one, I would love to do Rock and Roll High School, or or Eddie and the Cruisers.
Is that a 1984 movie, Eddie and the Cruisers?
It is. So that should be the one. That should really be the one, I think. I think that was 84. Maybe it was 83.
That would be something else, Eddie and the Cruisers. I like that idea.
Yeah, I would love to do it. I got to talk with the director for my rock and roll film encyclopedia, and I loved him, too. I'd love to go back to him and write more about that film.
Well, what was it about what kind of characterized the films of the 80s in their use of music that made them unique, do you think?
Well, for me, it was really sort of, the exploding of the old genre. The 70s did that to some extent. I mean, films like Cabaret are just staggeringly good in the 70s,
yeah.
and, they really changed the essence of what the musical is, and, what a brilliant film that is. But I think that, the path of the great path of film history, for better or worse, is that it started out as being filmed plays. So we're talking about starting out as very theatrical and artificial, and as we move forward in time, films become more gritty, more naturalistic, and I think that's the direction that we're going. And in some ways, the musical is the most theatrical and artificial of all genres, so it's had a hard time developing over the decades. Figuring out how to do that. We can accept anything as far as, monsters and stuff like that in our films, but it's hard to accept the idea of somebody breaking into song,
Right.
What makes you do that, whereas for previous generations, that was just instantly accepted. That's what the musical was. And when I look at the 80s, and I look at how rock and roll was changing, and I look at how film was changing, I see, Spinal Tap, with its technique of a mock documentary, showing one path towards realism almost. Well, listen, you can't discount the music in Spinal Tap. It's hysterical. It's great in its own way. But the milieu around that is this mockumentary. This Last Waltz-ish kind of mockumentary of a band, in its death throes essentially. And so there is some sort of aspect. I mean, people mistook it for real. They thought this is a real band. This is a real documentary. So there was the realism thing, and I think Purple Rain, with its music video cutting and stuff like that, was saying, look, this is another way you can do a musical today and still have people really like it. I think that both of those films were really trying to point to ways that the musical format could survive. I mean, because if you cut out all the stuff around Purple Rain and the 1980s stuff, I mean, it's a backstage musical. It's 42nd Street, whatever. It's something like that. But it's changed things as well. It's got an unconventional hero. It's got music video style cutting. It's not Busby Berkeley, type of stuff. It's things that fracture space and time and stuff like and it's also charting a very real scene, the Minneapolis scene. So, I look at these 1980s films and I see them struggling, and I think very successfully, with the idea of how to update the musical for modern audiences, so that modern audiences can get into them again. But it's funny. I don't think that necessarily people look at Spinal Tap as a musical. I think it was so successful in what it did that people tend not to look at it that way. I mean, it didn't make a lot of money at the time. When I say so successful, I mean it's beloved as a cult film.
Right,
It wasn't a success financially, so now people don't really say, oh, that's a musical. But if you look at other things Chris Guest has done, like Mighty Wind, well, again, it's a backstage musical, right? Right. So.
Well, what strikes me is when we talk about musicals of today, whether they're on stage or in film, it seems like a trend might be taking those movies, many of them from the 80s, and remaking them, or adapting them for the Broadway stage. It used to be that we made movies out of the best Broadway musicals, and now it's the opposite. It's a trend.
That's a really good observation. That's a smart insight, because I think in some ways that's reinforcing the argument I'm making, that in some ways these films were ahead of their time, because now we finally caught up with them and saying, oh yeah, let's do a musical of that, so yeah, like Footloose or what have you. So it's like time has finally caught up with that. We say, oh yeah, this was good. At the time, when you look at some of the early '80s things, people were in general. By people, I mean critics, complaining about quick cutting and stuff like that, and these young actors today, they dance with their faces, you know what I'm saying? Because they have stunt doubles and things like that. I think, it's always, I don't know, it's the job of the critic, but I think a critic's function that they sometimes fulfill is always to sort of be the old guard and say, well, this isn't like what it used to be. Because critics look back and they say, okay, this is what we use as a guidepost. And all other films were like this. So they don't always know how to reckon with something new and fresh. It's like, well, it's never been done like this, so it shouldn't be done with this. And I think that's how they make a mistake sometimes, because if you look at Flashdance or Footloose or whatever, no, it's not Fred Astaire pretty clearly, But it is an attempt to revive that form using the language that the generation of young people in the 80s would understand. The same thing with Spinal Tap. I mean, I've watched Spinal Tap with people who get up and leave in it. They're like, they don't get this. They just think it's horrible. They think this is making fun of these people. This is trashing these people. I've got to get out of here. This is so mean-spirited. And in fact, it's not really mean-spirited. It's not really trashing anybody. It's
right.
It's but some people, just don't get that. They just don't get it. And it's the idea of the shock of the new. And I think that's very true of how Spinal Tap was received. But interestingly, Purple Rain got great reviews. The shock of the new didn't seem to prevent people from enjoying Purple Rain. If anything, it's like now people want to say, no, it wasn't that good. Now people want to go back and say, oh, it was cheesy. It was the mid-'80s, big hair, big collars, ruffles, whatever. It's like they want to dismiss it now. And, I want to say, no, look, this is, this was great work just as film art in that time. And so to dismiss it, feels very wrong, just because today we don't wear our hair that way or wear clothes that look like that. I mean, that's ridiculous, right? So.
Yeah, look at the greatest films of the 70s. I mean, we weren't wearing bell bottoms. We're not wearing bell bottoms today, but that doesn't make the movie itself any less relevant,
Right. And some people seem to really believe that argument. Sometimes I think even George Lucas does. When it's like he's trying by taking out the special effects of the original Star Wars and such. It's like he's saying, you know what? This film has to appeal to all generations forever, so anything that can mark it as being of the 70s, like how we did special effects in the 70s, must be removed. It's like, oh.
Well, it's true, and what you're saying about the kind of the resistance of anything new and forward thinking, I mean, it's definitely present today, and I see that even last year, if you look at all the movies that were a lot of the movies that were popular last year, they were all about nostalgia.
Right.
Whether the Artist, Midnight in Paris, Hugo, I mean, all great movies, but there was something that people connected to where they wanted to return to kind of a different time in the past.
Well, that's another really good observation. And, I don't know if that is because people are unhappy with where our culture now is and there's some sort of solace in the way things were done and the way things did look. But, I think there's a price for that. I think there's a price for having your art always look backwards. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if you look at something like Spinal Tap or Purple Rain, they were works of art that really looked forward. I mean, I don't know if I stress this enough in the book, but the idea that, a guy who's maybe 5'2", he's black, like I said, he sometimes wears high heels and, feminine clothing, he's androgynous, that this guy could front a motion picture that's a huge blockbuster success, and he becomes a sex symbol, in white conservative America of the moral majority in Reagan era. That's pretty astounding. That is pretty astounding. And I think it speaks to what, how true and authentic Purple Rain seems. And that people, even though it's a very local story of this kid in Minneapolis, it's also, the global story of people sort of striving to be better and to overcome where they came from and become who they know they can be. So it's this really delicate equation between something that's extremely local and narrow and making it appealing by being so true and universal, to so many people.
I think that hits upon why the movie was the success it was. I think you just articulated it. The kind of the need to break out of the constrictions of that time. And I don't know that could be done today. I mean, it's gotten so much more constrictive and aggressive that I don't think people would be open to that kind of thing today.
No, I think you're absolutely right. Today, there's like an extremely efficient machine. I mean, it is a machine. It's like a media machine that for anybody who steps out of what the expected boundaries are, that person is immediately slimed and pushed back. Like, I don't think a Prince could break out today. Mm-hmm. You know, I think we've become so polarized in this country that, you know, for everyone who would like him, there'd be other people who were saying why he can't be liked. You know,
right.
You know, what's wrong with his lifestyle? What's wrong with his clothes? What's wrong with this? You know, we've gotten really good about judging other people, I think, in this country, and that's not a very conducive environment for creating art, in my opinion. Like, you feel that you're going to be very criticized and put down and attacked by, you know, fully 50% of the population. You know, 24 hours a day on cable news, you know, that's not very conducive to making art, in my opinion.
Right. Here we go again. We always do this, whether we talk about De Palma or horror films. We always get to the philosophical or the political, and